Ethan sat at the dimly lit dining table, absently stirring his coffee as the clock ticked past midnight. The house was silent, save for the distant hum of the refrigerator. His wife, Laura, had gone to bed hours ago, without so much as a good night. It had been months, no years, since she had looked at him with anything resembling desire. Their marriage had become a shell, a performance for the world, held together by routine rather than love. He glanced toward the hallway, where a single door remained slightly ajar. His son, Caleb, was still awake. Ethan could see the faint glow of a screen illuminating the room. The boy was 20 now, no longer a boy really. He was lean, with sharp features that mirrored Laura's youth, though his eyes were softer, more understanding. Lately, Ethan had noticed the way Caleb watched him, a quiet attentiveness that neither judgment nor pity accompanied. It was unsettling, but also comforting. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. Was this it? Was this how marriages died? Not in a dramatic explosion, but in the slow erosion of intimacy, the quiet suffocation of words left unsaid. Laura had stopped trying long before he did. She had withdrawn into herself, offering only vague excuses and hollow reassurances whenever he broached the topic of their fading intimacy. "I'm tired," she would say. "Not tonight." Eventually, he stopped asking. Tonight was no different. When he had slipped into bed beside her earlier, she had turned away, feigning sleep. He knew better. He had lain there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the ceiling, his mind restless. Then, at some point, he thought he had felt something, a shift in the air, the sensation of warmth beside him. A touch, barely perceptible, yet intimate in a way that sent a shiver down his spine. He had reached out instinctively, fingertips brushing against fabric softer than Laura's usual nightgown. It was strange, but exhaustion blurred the edges of his thoughts, and before he could make sense of it, sleep had claimed him. Now, in the solitude of the kitchen, a quiet unease settled over him. Had he imagined it? He shook his head, dismissing the thought. He was just tired, worn down by the weight of a loveless marriage. Footsteps. Ethan looked up as Caleb entered the kitchen, barefoot and dressed in an oversized sweater that draped over his frame. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as though he had just woken up. "Couldn't sleep?" Caleb asked, his voice low, almost knowing. Ethan offered a weary smile. "Something like that." Caleb leaned against the counter, watching him. "You've been staying up later than usual." "So have you," Ethan countered, raising an eyebrow. Caleb shrugged. "Guess we're both a little restless." There was a quiet moment between them, stretched taut with unspoken words. Caleb's eyes lingered on him, curious, searching. Ethan wasn't sure what to make of it. "You should get some rest," Ethan said, his voice gentler than he intended. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, you too, Dad." As Caleb retreated to his room, Ethan remained seated, fingers tightening around his coffee mug. Why did that exchange feel different? He had never noticed it before. The way Caleb moved, the way his voice dipped just slightly, the way his presence lingered even after he had left the room. A chill ran through Ethan, but he couldn't say why. And then, as he finally stood to return to bed, he caught sight of something on the back of the couch. Something small and silky, half hidden in the shadows. A piece of fabric. His breath hitched as he picked it up. It was not his wife's nightgown. It was something else entirely, and it smelled faintly of lavender. Ethan awoke in the middle of the night, his body tense, heart pounding against his ribs. The air in the room felt different, charged with something intangible yet undeniable. He wasn't alone. A warmth pressed against his side. A soft hand traced along his arm, hesitant, deliberate. "Laura?" His breath hitched. It had been so long since she had touched him like this, since her body had sought his in the stillness of night. He turned slightly, eyes heavy with sleep, unwilling to question it, unwilling to let the moment slip away. Fingers grazed his chest. A shiver coursed through him, a forgotten sensation, almost painful in its sweetness. The touch was lighter, more delicate than he remembered, hesitant, yet full of longing. He reached out, his hand skimming smooth skin, and his pulse quickened. It felt different. He told himself not to overthink, not to dissect the details. He had spent years aching for this, for any semblance of closeness. The scent of lavender filled his senses, calming and intoxicating all at once. Soft lips brushed his jawline, feather-light, testing. Ethan exhaled, surrendering to the sensation. His fingers curled into fabric, something thinner than Laura's usual nightgown. But before his mind could catch up, the moment deepened. A quiet, trembling breath against his ear. A sigh that wasn't quite hers. A feeling crawled up his spine. Asterisk, asterisk familiarity where there should have been none, asterisk, asterisk. His eyes snapped open. The figure beside him stilled, as if sensing his sudden awareness. The shadows concealed everything, but his body knew what his mind refused to comprehend. He didn't move. Neither did the other presence. His pulse roared in his ears. And then the weight beside him lifted. The bed shifted. A moment later, the quiet creak of the door. Gone. Ethan lay frozen, breath shallow. What had just happened? The next morning, the house felt heavier, as if the walls themselves held secrets. Laura was already gone, off to work before dawn, as usual. Caleb, however, lingered in the kitchen, standing by the coffee pot, as if waiting for something. Ethan hesitated at the threshold, his mind replaying the night before in fragments. He searched Caleb's face for a clue, for anything that would confirm or dismiss the gnawing suspicion clawing at his chest. Morning, Caleb said, his voice steady, though his eyes carried something unreadable. Ethan nodded, wary. His throat was dry. Did you sleep well? Caleb's lips twitched. I did. You. Ethan swallowed. There was something in the way Caleb looked at him. Too measured, too controlled. He could still feel the phantom touch on his skin. The ghost of last night clung to him, refusing to be rationalized away. Yeah, Ethan lied. Silence stretched between them. Then Caleb spoke casually, almost too casually. Mom called. Said she'll be home late again. He turned, pouring coffee into a mug. Busy as always. Ethan only nodded, unable to find words. That night, Ethan forced himself to stay awake. He lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, his breath shallow with anticipation. His heart pounded harder with each passing hour. Would it happen again? His body was betraying him, wanting something it shouldn't, something his mind screamed against. And then it happened. Soft footsteps, the subtle shift of the mattress, the scent of lavender. A hush fell over the room as the warmth of another body settled beside him. Ethan's pulse roared. His mind was at war with itself. Turn over. Confront it. Put an end to this, asterisk, asterisk. But he didn't move, because the touch returned, slow and deliberate, as if waiting for rejection that never came. And Ethan? He let it happen. Ethan didn't know how long he had been staring at the ceiling. His body was still warm from the touch that had just left him, from the weight that had disappeared into the dark before dawn. He hadn't moved. He hadn't stopped it. The scent of lavender still clung to the sheets. His mind twisted itself into knots, clawing for explanations, justifications, anything to make sense of what had been happening. What he had let happen. The truth pressed against him, heavy, undeniable. But even now, his body betrayed him, still aching for something it should never have craved. Morning came, dragging reality with it. The sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen pulled Ethan from his haze. He hesitated before stepping out of the bedroom, his throat dry, his heart slamming against his ribs. Would he look different today? Would it be written all over his face? Asterisk, asterisk. When he entered the kitchen, Caleb was already there, back turned, washing a plate. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway. Say something. Act normal, asterisk, asterisk. Morning, Caleb said without turning around. The words slithered through Ethan's skin, wrapping around his spine like a vice. The same voice. The same presence. The same person, asterisk, asterisk. Ethan forced himself to move, to sit, to reach for the coffee Caleb had already poured for him. He knew, and Caleb knew that he knew. It was there, in the way he finally turned, meeting Ethan's gaze with something unreadable, something both patient and expectant. Ethan's fingers trembled against the mug. He willed himself to speak, to demand an answer, to bring down the weight of his own morality and crush whatever had been festering between them. But when his lips parted, the words never came. Caleb's lips quirked at the corner, subtle, almost amused. He was waiting for Ethan to be the one to say it. To admit it, ***. But Ethan couldn't. Not yet. That night, Laura didn't come home. Ethan sat in the darkened living room, the television humming quietly, playing a show he wasn't watching. His fingers curled against the couch's armrest, his pulse a steady drum in his ears. He knew Caleb was still awake. He could feel it. Every nerve in his body braced for what he already knew was inevitable. Soft footsteps. A pause. Then, Caleb's voice. Gentle, patient. "Can I sit?" Ethan didn't answer, but Caleb sat anyway. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. Every breath, every shift of fabric felt deafening. Then Caleb spoke again, quieter this time. "You know, don't you?" Ethan inhaled sharply. His fingers dug into the cushion beneath him. He didn't nod. He didn't confirm it. But Caleb didn't need him to. "I never meant to lie to you." Caleb's voice was steady. "I just wanted to be close to you." Ethan closed his eyes, his stomach twisting. Close, the word felt too soft for what had been happening, for the boundaries that had been shattered. Caleb shifted beside him, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Did you ever wish it wasn't her?" Ethan's breath hitched. "I see how you look at her," Caleb continued. "How empty you are when you're with her." A pause. "But you weren't empty last night." Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Stop." His voice was hoarse, unsteady. Caleb looked up at him, unflinching. "Why?" "Because it's the truth." Ethan's hands trembled at his sides. This wasn't real. This wasn't happening, ***. But it was. And the worst part? It wasn't disgust coursing through him. It wasn't anger. It was fear, not of Caleb, but of himself, of how easily he had let it happen, of how much he had wanted it. Ethan turned away, raking a hand through his hair, his breath coming too fast. "This can't happen again,"